Hello Reason lovers, my name is John Beskip and I'm here with a Synchronous video tutorial, the timed effect modulator. We're going to be using it to create what I'd call glitch percussion, and I was inspired to try doing this by listening to the band Telefon Tel Aviv, and specifically they've got an album called Fahrenheit Fair Enough. If you listen to track number 1 from that album, which you could probably find on YouTube or somewhere, you can hear that they've got an incredible assault of percussion that if one were to try to program manually would take a lifetime. So obviously that's automated somehow, and I've always wondered how to do that and never been able to until I figured it out recently with using Synchronous. So I'm going to show you how. I've got a large project here. If you look over in the rack, you can obviously see there's a bunch of stuff going on, but ignore all that. For now, we're just going to focus on this one combinator down here at the bottom, which I've got labeled Crazy Percussion Demo. And right now, if I play this, let me make sure everything else is muted. I'm going to mute that. I'm going to play this, and you can hear the sound of a vibraphone. And I've just got some chords programmed in here in the sequencer, and the whole purpose of these particular chords is just to make sure that every different possible note in the scale is hit. And so the chords themselves aren't really anything that important. But if I go back to my rack, you can see here this is what's being played. And I'm going to show you how I've got this hooked up here. I'm going to zoom in. I've got an arpeggiator in this combinator, which I've labeled randomizer. I've got an NNXT, which is currently located with or loaded with a placeholder sound effect, the vibes, and that's labeled percussion samples because we're about to change it. And then I've got the Synchronous, which I've drawn 3 random curves using that first step tool right there. Number 2 is just another random, looks like a city skyline. And then number 3 is just some short hits. We're going to, there's also an automatic retro transform, but it's really not doing much. We're going to go back up here to the NNXT, and the first thing I'm going to do is turn on this arpeggiator. So this arpeggiator is connected right here. As you can see, the gate CV output is going to the gate CV input. Likewise, the CV and the note are connected. So if I hit play, and now I turn the arpeggiator on, you can hear that right now it's set to random, 3 octaves, and 16th note. So it's doing this, it's just kind of bouncing the notes all over the place, which is fine, that's what we want it to do. The first thing I'm going to do right now is hit Control A to select all the samples in the programmer of the NNXT and hit the delete key to remove them all. So right now it's empty, as if you had initialized the device. And we're going to load it up with going into the, let me zoom back out here. We're going into the factory sound bank under the Kong patches, Kong sounds and samples, percussion, and under the Woods directory. I'm just going to load every possible sound in the Woods directory. I'm going to hit OK. And now it's brought them in here. And as you can see, this is no good right now because every sample is mapped for that whole range. And we don't want that. We want these. So if I hit play, it's just this crazy, we don't want that. So I'm going to right click and scroll down until I find the option auto map zones chromatically. That's important right there. Auto map zones chromatically. And so when I hit that, as long as I've got them all selected, which they currently are, it will individually place them all so within that area. So that's how we want things. So now if I hit play, there we go. So we're getting somewhere. This is an array of sounds, and it's bouncing around randomly between them thanks to the action of the arpeggiator. But what sounds not so cool about this that Telefon Tel Aviv has going on in their awesome percussion thing is that they have rests. So hitting play again, I could just do something like this, and yeah, that sort of works, but it's kind of, it doesn't have enough randomness for me. So what we're going to do is go down here to the Synchronous, and I've drawn in these curves here, which are just pretty much random for the purpose of making rests here. And how I'm going to do that is by taking the curve 1 CV output right here, and then if I go back up, that's connected to the CV1 input of the combinator programmer. So I'm going to just remove it once and bring it back to show you where that is. The programmer CV input on the combinator. If I flip back around, you can see it's this part here. And as far as ideas contained in this tutorial, that's really the gold mine right there. I'm using it to do one particular thing, but you can use that CV input on the programmer section of the combinator to do just about anything imaginable. So as you can see, it gives you a list of the devices that are inside the combinator. I'm going to click on the randomizer, which is what I've named the arpeggiator. Then I'm going to select the source over here, and I'm going to scroll down to CV input 1, and I'm going to select that. And now the CV input 1 within the randomizer monophonic arpeggiator here is going to pattern and then pattern right here. So with that selected, when it goes along and I hit play, now we're getting this crazy bouncing of infinite different potentials here. And I'm not even sure why it's made this way. I mean, you can see there's about 60,000 different settings. I have no idea what the intended usage of this is, but this is a usage of it. So what we've accomplished is we've used the Synchronous to add random rests. So now we're bouncing around between all these different wood sound effects. And I didn't really take the time to vet any of these. I just grabbed a whole directory and dumped them in here. If you wanted to be really awesome about this, you'd probably pick very specifically what samples are going into this, and you'd have a directory that you dump it all in there, and you've checked the samples beforehand. Just to note it while we're here, the Synchronous is doing a few other things as well. CV2, I've drawn another random cityscape here. It also happens to be controlling some ring mod distortion, which I had unactivated before, but I'm turning it back on now. It's nothing crazy, but it adds a little something. There you can kind of hear it. If we flip around to the back, the inverted CV from curve 2 of the Synchronous, and hit stop, is going up to the programmer CV input, which you may have noticed before, on the same place in the programmer of the combinator for the Crazy Percussion demo. And if I flip back around to the front, I'm clicking on the NNXT labeled percussion samples, and I'm going to change this blank thing to CV input 2, which is the curve 2 from the Synchronous device, and that's now sending to pitch bend of the combinator. And I've lessened it a little bit. It isn't the full spectrum, so the pitch bend now bounces around like this. And by itself, that doesn't sound like much, but when you start putting other things around it, that pitch bend does really add something. So I think that's an important little extra touch there. So we've got two different curves from the Synchronous controlling the programmer CV inputs there through these outputs. And the last thing I did here, just kind of for kicks, is to route the curve of CV3 into the freeze of curve 2, which, just as you can see, CV2 is marching along here, stops it briefly. So here's curve 3. When it reaches the maximum point right there, boom, CV2 gets stopped, curve 2 gets stopped for just a second there. The other thing it's doing is adding some reverb every once in a while, just like that. And this, I could make it bigger maybe. Yeah, that sounds better. There you go. So a little bit of reverb just every once in a while, kind of randomly. And if you really wanted to make it random, I guess you could do something like this. So that's an awesome thing to do. You just lessen the pattern by a little bit. Now it's going to fall all sorts of different places as we continue to loop. I'm going to zoom back out. So I created all this stuff here. And as you can see, it's part of a large rack. And so what I'm going to start doing now is unmuting things so you can hear how it would sound together with a few other extra pieces of stuff thrown in. So as you might have noticed here, I've got almost the same thing going on right next to it in the rack next door. And that's because that's the devices I built when I was figuring out how to do this. And so we've got another arpeggiator. The same concept is going on. It's controlled through this CV merger and splitter here as well. And then it's got this subtractor just to hear what it would sound like, because I was curious. So if I go to the mixer, I'm going to mute the crazy percussion samples and hit play. So nothing's playing right now. If I turn on the synchro arp, this is that right here. This is that subtractor that I was just pointing at. And so this is playing same concept, that arpeggiator. And I've got that routed to what I labeled sample mayhem here. And I'm going to unmute that. And so this is the same concept. I'm going to move the synchro arp. So instead of the woods directory of the Kong patches, this is the electronic sounds. And so now I'm going to combine that with what I just elaborated at length with the crazy percussion demo. So here they are together. So this is just two different directories of sound effects doing the same thing. And now I'm just going to put this beat underneath it so you can kind of hear it in more of a context. So there you have it. That's pretty much what they were doing with Telefon Tel Aviv and the crazy array of percussion that they had. One more thing that I'll note before we wrap it up here, I'm just going to mute all that crazy percussion, and we're going to go back to the rack. I'm going to zoom back out. One thing worth noting is that kind of using the same concept through the combinator programmer section, I'm using Synchronous to control the pattern select on the Dr. Octo Rex. So you can juggle your beats using the Synchronous right here. What I've got is curve number 1. It's just pretty much a straight line, and then it comes up a little bit at the end. If I flip the rack over, the curve number 1 output, again, is going up to the programmer CV input of the combinator. So I'm flipping it back around. And so the Dr. Octo Rex, I've got CV input 1 right here, going to loop slot. So under pattern, loop slot. And you could change the min-max if you wanted to only select, say, the first 4 or something like that. I've actually only got it bouncing between maybe two or three samples here. You could load this up with a whole bunch of different beats that sounded great. I didn't take the time to do that. I just picked 3, one kind of bass and 2 different fills. And it just kind of randomly makes it jump between those. So that's the same concept, using the CV outputs of your Synchronous, which is really great as sort of an LFO generator, really, and feeding them into the programmer CV input, and then using that programmer CV input to route it to wherever you could possibly imagine it to go. So I'll go back to the mixer and just unmute a bunch of this stuff so you can kind of listen to it for a little bit, and thank you for watching the video. I hope you found something helpful and enjoyed these goofy sounds.